No Indian knows how to read." The words echoed through the small schoolhouse in Tucson, Arizona, as Mrs. Henderson's voice dripped with the kind of prejudice that had poisoned the American Southwest for generations. It was 1952, and the desert sun beat mercilessly against the wooden walls of the segregated classroom, where Native American children were forced to abandon their heritage for what white society called civilization. But what happened next would shatter every assumption this teacher held about the Apache boy, sitting silently in the back row. Joseph Crow Feather had walked 12 miles through the Sonoran Desert that morning, his worn moccasins leaving barely a trace on the hard-packed earth. At 15, his weathered hands told stories of survival that most adults would never understand. His grandfather had been a warrior who rode with Geronimo, and his father had died fighting in World War II, wearing the same uniform as the men who had stolen their ancestral lands. Now Joseph sat in this suffocating room, listening to a woman who had never stepped foot outside her comfortable world tell him what he could and couldn't do. The other children, Navajo, Hopi, and Apache, kept their eyes down as Mrs. Henderson continued her daily ritual of humiliation. She believed that breaking their spirits was the first step in making them proper Americans. The government boarding school system had been designed for exactly this purpose: kill the Indian, save the man. But Joseph's dark eyes held something different that morning, something that made the teacher unconsciously step back when she noticed his steady gaze. Hey, my friends, if you're enjoying this incredible true story of courage and determination, help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and don't forget to click that hype button. It's super important because it helps the algorithm deliver this content to more people who need to hear these powerful stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth. Mrs. Henderson had arrived in Arizona 3 months earlier from Boston, carrying with her all the prejudices of the East Coast elite. She had volunteered for this position believing she was bringing enlightenment to the savage children of the desert. Her starched white dress and perfectly pinned hair were her armor against what she saw as the primitive world around her. She had never bothered to learn that many of these children spoke 3 or 4 languages fluently, or that their oral traditions contained mathematical concepts and astronomical knowledge that rivaled anything taught in her precious Eastern schools. "You see, children," she continued, turning to write on the blackboard, "this is why your people will always be inferior. You cannot adapt to the modern world because you lack the intellectual capacity for true learning." Her chalk scraped against the board as she wrote simple arithmetic problems. "Your ancestors lived like animals, following herds and worshipping rocks. Only through proper education can you hope to become useful members of society." The silence in the room was deafening. Joseph's younger sister, Maria, sat 3 rows ahead, her small shoulders trembling with suppressed anger. She was only 12, but she had already learned to read and write in both English and Spanish by watching her brothers study by candlelight in their one-room adobe home. Their mother worked 16-hour days as a seamstress in town, saving every penny to buy books and paper for her children's education. She believed that knowledge was the only weapon that could protect them in a world that wanted to erase their existence. Joseph's mind wandered to the previous evening, when his grandfather had visited their small home on the outskirts of the reservation. The old man's face was a map of the desert, lined with years of wisdom and suffering. He had fought in the Apache wars, had seen his people forced onto reservations, had watched as their children were stolen and sent to boarding schools designed to strip away their identity. But he had also seen something else: the power of adaptation, the strength that came from learning the enemy's tools, while never forgetting who you truly were. "Grandson," the old man had said in Apache, his voice barely above a whisper, "the white man's words can be weapons, but only if you know how to use them. Your father died believing that fighting with guns was the answer. But the real war is fought with knowledge. Learn their language, master their numbers, understand their laws, but never let them convince you that their way is the only way." The memory strengthened Joseph's resolve as Mrs. Henderson continued her lecture. She was explaining how the Indian problem would be solved through education and assimilation, how their primitive cultures would eventually disappear as they became productive members of American society. Her words were like acid, designed to burn away any pride or connection to their heritage. But Joseph had been preparing for this moment his entire life. When the teacher finally paused in her monologue, Joseph slowly stood up. The wooden chair creaked against the floor, and every head in the classroom turned toward him. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed with irritation. "Sit down, boy. I didn't give you permission to speak." But Joseph remained standing, his tall frame casting a shadow across the dusty floor. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his English perfect and precise, "you said no Indian knows how to read. I'd like to respectfully disagree with that statement." The teacher's face flushed red with anger. "How dare you interrupt me? This is exactly the kind of insolent behavior we're trying to correct. Sit down immediately, or you'll be sent to the principal for punishment." Joseph didn't move. Instead, he reached into his worn leather satchel and pulled out a thick, well-thumbed book. The cover was faded, but the title was still clearly visible. Advanced Calculus and Mathematical Analysis. Gasps echoed through the classroom as the other students recognized the complexity of the text. Even Mrs. Henderson's confident expression began to waver. "This book," Joseph said calmly, "belongs to my father. He was studying to become an engineer before the war took him away. He taught me to read when I was 4 years old, first in Apache, then in English, and later in Spanish. By the time I was 10, I had read every book in the mission library twice." He opened the book to a page filled with complex equations and began to read aloud, his voice steady and clear. The mathematical concepts flowed from his lips like poetry, each formula explained with the kind of understanding that only came from years of dedicated study. Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open as she realized that this primitive boy understood advanced mathematics better than most college graduates. The other students sat in stunned silence, watching their classmate transform before their eyes from a target of ridicule into a force of intellectual power. Joseph closed the book and looked directly at his teacher. "My grandfather taught me that knowledge has no color, no race, no boundaries. The same stars that guided my ancestors across the desert guided the ships of your ancestors across the ocean. The same mathematical principles that helped us track seasons and predict weather patterns are the ones that built your cities and machines. The difference isn't in our capacity to learn, it's in who gets the opportunity to prove what they know." The classroom remained silent as Joseph walked to the front of the room. Mrs. Henderson stepped back instinctively, her authority crumbling with each step he took. Without asking permission, he picked up a piece of chalk and began to write on the blackboard. But instead of solving the simple arithmetic problems she had written, he began to work through a complex calculus equation, his movements fluid and confident. As he wrote, he spoke. "This equation represents the trajectory of a projectile accounting for wind resistance and gravitational pull. My great-grandfather used similar calculations, though not written down, to predict where arrows would land when hunting buffalo. The principles are the same, only the tools have changed." The chalk moved across the board with precision, creating a mathematical proof that would have challenged university students. When he finished, Joseph turned back to face the class. "You asked us to write our names," he said simply. Then, in beautiful flowing script, he wrote Joseph Crowfeather on the board, followed by the same name in Apache symbols, and then in Spanish. 3 languages, 3 ways of seeing the world, 3 different paths to the same truth. The silence stretched on until it was broken by the sound of slow clapping. Maria had started applauding her brother, tears streaming down her face. One by one, the other students joined in, their applause growing louder and more confident with each passing second. For the first time in months, they were not ashamed of who they were. Mrs. Henderson stood frozen, her worldview shattered by the quiet dignity and brilliant mind of the boy she had tried to humiliate. She had come to Arizona believing she was superior, that her education and background made her better than these children. But in that moment she realized that she was the one who had been ignorant, the one who had been blind to the rich intellectual traditions that surrounded her. Joseph returned to his seat, but the dynamic in the classroom had changed forever. The other students sat straighter, their eyes brighter with possibility. They had seen one of their own stand up to prejudice with knowledge and dignity, and they understood that education could be a weapon of liberation rather than oppression. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, but no one moved. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air like the desert heat, transformative and undeniable. Mrs. Henderson finally found her voice. though it came out as barely a whisper. Class dismissed. As the students filed out, Joseph gathered his books slowly. His sister waited for him by the door, her eyes shining with pride and admiration. "How did you know all that?" she asked as they walked into the blazing afternoon sun. Joseph smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn in that building. "Grandfather always said that our people were scholars long before there were schools. We studied the stars, the seasons, the patterns of life itself. The white man's education is just another tool, and tools can be used to build or to destroy. Today, we chose to build." The walk home seemed shorter that day, their steps lighter despite the heavy books in their satchels. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the small community, carried by children who ran ahead to tell their families about the day an Apache boy had silenced a prejudiced teacher with nothing but knowledge and courage. That evening, as the sun set over the desert mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no artist could truly capture, Joseph sat with his grandfather on the porch of their small home. The old man listened without interruption as his grandson recounted the day's events, nodding occasionally with approval. "You did well, grandson," the elder said finally. "But remember, this is only the beginning. Knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, and wisdom without compassion is useless. You have shown them that we are not what they believe us to be. Now you must show them what we truly are." Joseph understood. The real work lay ahead, not just in proving that Native Americans could excel in the white man's world, but in preserving and sharing the wisdom of their own traditions. He would need to walk in both worlds, serving as a bridge between cultures while never losing sight of his roots. As the stars emerged in the clear desert sky, the same stars his ancestors had used for navigation and storytelling, Joseph made a silent promise. He would use his education not to escape his heritage, but to honor it. He would become the scholar his grandfather envisioned, the leader his community needed, and the bridge his people required to survive in a changing world. The first block of this incredible true story ends here, but Joseph's journey was far from over. What happened next would not only change his life forever, but would also challenge everything his community believed about the power of education and the price of standing up for justice. The next morning brought news that would test everything Joseph had accomplished. Principal Morrison, a stern man whose face seemed permanently etched with disapproval, had called an emergency meeting with the school board. Mrs. Henderson had spent the entire night writing a detailed report about the incident in her classroom, painting Joseph not as a brilliant student, but as a disruptive troublemaker who had undermined her authority and threatened the school's disciplinary structure. Joseph arrived at school to find a crowd gathered outside the main building. Parents, teachers, and school board members stood in heated discussion, their voices carrying across the dusty courtyard. His stomach tightened as he recognized the tone of the conversation. This wasn't about celebrating academic achievement. This was about putting him back in his place. "That boy needs to be expelled immediately," declared board member Harrison, a wealthy rancher whose family had profited from land seized from native tribes. "We cannot allow this kind of insubordination to spread. Give these Indians an inch and they'll take a mile. Next thing you know, they'll be demanding equal treatment in our schools." Mrs. Henderson stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her starched dress. "He embarrassed me in front of the entire class," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "He made me look foolish, and he encouraged the other children to disrespect authority. This is exactly the kind of behavior the boarding school system was designed to eliminate." But not everyone agreed. Dr. Samuel Martinez, the only Mexican-American member of the school board, had heard a different version of events from his daughter, who attended the same school. "From what I understand," he said carefully, "the boy simply demonstrated his knowledge when challenged. Isn't that what we want from our students? Academic excellence?" "Academic excellence from the right kind of students," Harrison shot back. "These people need to learn their place in society. We're not running a charity here. We're preparing them for the jobs they're suited for. Manual labor, domestic work, maybe farming if they're lucky. Filling their heads with advanced mathematics and fancy ideas only makes them dissatisfied with their lot in life." Joseph listened from behind a nearby building, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and fear. Everything his grandfather had warned him about was coming true. Excellence from a Native American wasn't celebrated. It was seen as a threat to the established order. The very system that claimed to educate them was designed to keep them in predetermined roles, forever subservient to white authority. As the debate continued, Joseph noticed a figure approaching from the direction of town. It was Father Miguel Santos, the elderly priest who ran the mission library where Joseph had spent countless hours reading. The priest was well respected in the community, one of the few white men who had consistently advocated for Native American rights and education. His presence at the school could only mean one thing. Word of yesterday's events had reached far beyond the classroom. "Gentlemen, ladies," Father Santos said as he joined the group, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent serving the community. "I understand there's been some controversy regarding young Joseph Crow Feather. I felt it was important to share some information that might help put this situation in proper perspective." Principal Morrison stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the priest's intervention. "Father Santos, with all due respect, this is a school matter. We're perfectly capable of handling our own disciplinary issues." The priest smiled gently, but his eyes held steel. "Of course you are, Principal Morrison. But I think you should know that Joseph has been coming to our library for over 6 years. In that time, he has read more books than most of our seminary students. He has helped me translate historical documents from Spanish to English, and he has tutored younger children in mathematics and reading. The boy you're considering expelling is one of the most gifted students I have ever encountered." Mrs. Henderson's face flushed red. "That's impossible. These children barely speak English properly, let alone what?" Father Santos interrupted, his voice sharp. "Let alone demonstrate intelligence that challenges your preconceptions? Let alone prove that the color of one's skin has nothing to do with the capacity of one's mind?" He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a thick folder. "These are letters of recommendation I've written for Joseph to several universities. Stanford, Berkeley, even Harvard. All of them have expressed interest in meeting him." The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, while Mrs. Henderson stared at the folder as if it contained some impossible revelation. The idea that a Native American boy from the reservation could be university material was so far outside their worldview that they couldn't process it. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, his interest clearly piqued. "Father, are you saying that Joseph is qualified for university admission?" "I'm saying that Joseph is not only qualified, but that he would excel at any institution fortunate enough to have him," the priest replied firmly. "His mathematical abilities are extraordinary. His understanding of multiple languages is impressive, and his analytical thinking surpasses that of most adults. The question isn't whether he belongs in higher education. It's whether our educational system is worthy of students like him." Joseph felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see his grandfather standing behind him. The old man's weathered face was calm, but his eyes held the same steel that Joseph had seen in Father Santos. "It's time, grandson," he said quietly in Apache. "Time to show them who we really are." Together, they walked around the building and approached the group. The conversation stopped abruptly as Joseph appeared, his grandfather beside him like a living reminder of the proud heritage that these people were trying to erase. Joseph carried his leather satchel, but today it contained more than just his father's mathematics book. "Principal Morrison," Joseph said respectfully, "I understand there are concerns about my behavior yesterday. I'd like the opportunity to address them." Harrison stepped forward aggressively. "You've caused enough trouble, boy. We've decided that you're a disruptive influence and—" "Mr. Harrison," Joseph interrupted politely but firmly, "with respect, I believe you're making decisions based on incomplete information." He opened his satchel and began removing items: certificates of achievement from correspondence courses, letters from university professors who had reviewed his work, and a thick notebook filled with his own mathematical proofs and scientific observations. "For the past 3 years," Joseph continued, "I've been taking advanced courses through the mail from the University of Arizona. Professor Williams in the mathematics department has been reviewing my work and has invited me to audit his classes. Professor Chen in the engineering department has asked me to assist with a research project on water conservation systems, something that might benefit our entire region." He handed the documents to Dr. Martinez, who examined them with growing amazement. "These are legitimate university-level courses," the doctor said, looking up at the group. "And his grades are exceptional." Joseph's grandfather stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear, each word chosen with precision. "My grandson has brought honor to our family and our people. But more than that, he has shown that the gifts of the Creator know no boundaries of race or culture. To punish him for excellence is to punish the very ideals this school claims to represent." Mrs. Henderson found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. But he made me look foolish in front of the class." "No, ma'am," Joseph replied gently. "I simply answered your challenge. You said no Indian could read. I proved that statement wrong. If that made you uncomfortable, perhaps the problem isn't with my response but with your assumption." Father Santos stepped into the circle, his folder still in hand. "I have here acceptance letters from 3 universities, all offering Joseph full scholarships. They want him to start in the fall semester. The question before us today isn't whether to punish this young man for his achievements. It's whether we're going to support one of our community's brightest minds as he reaches for opportunities that will benefit us all." The weight of the moment settled over the group like the desert heat. Here was a Native American boy who had not only met but exceeded every academic standard they could set, who had earned recognition from institutions they revered, and who had done it all while facing daily prejudice and discrimination. To expel him now would expose the hypocrisy of their entire educational philosophy. Dr. Martinez was the first to speak. "I move that we not only reverse any disciplinary action against Joseph, but that we formally recognize his achievements and offer him our full support as he pursues higher education." "Seconded," said Father Santos immediately. Principal Morrison looked around the group, realizing that the tide had turned completely. "All in favor?" 3 hands went up immediately. Mrs. Henderson hesitated, then slowly raised her hand as well. Only Harrison remained opposed, his face red with anger and frustration. "Motion carried," Principal Morrison announced, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. "Joseph, you are not only reinstated, but we will work with you to ensure your remaining time here prepares you for university success." Joseph felt his grandfather's hand squeeze his shoulder proudly, but the old man wasn't finished. "There is one more thing," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "My grandson will go to university, yes, but he will not forget who he is or where he comes from. He will return to help his people, to build bridges between our world and yours. Education is not about leaving your community behind. It's about gaining the tools to lift your community up." As the crowd began to disperse, Mrs. Henderson approached Joseph hesitantly. Her face showed a mixture of embarrassment and something that might have been respect. "Joseph," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I came here with assumptions that were clearly wrong. Perhaps you could help me understand how to better serve students like you." Joseph looked at his teacher, really looked at her, and saw not just prejudice but fear and ignorance that could be overcome with patience and understanding. "Mrs. Henderson," he said gently, "I'd be honored to help. But first you need to understand that there are no students like me. There are just students, each with their own gifts and potential. The color of our skin doesn't determine the content of our minds." That afternoon, Joseph returned to his classroom for the first time since the confrontation. But everything had changed. The other Native American students looked at him with new eyes, not just as a fellow victim of discrimination, but as proof that they too could achieve greatness. The few white students in the integrated classes watched him with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. Mrs. Henderson had spent her lunch break reorganizing her lesson plans. When Joseph entered, she was writing complex mathematical problems on the board, real challenges that would engage advanced students rather than the simple arithmetic she had been using to keep native students at a basic level. "Today," she announced to the class, "we're going to explore advanced problem solving. Joseph, would you be willing to help demonstrate some of these concepts?" Joseph smiled and walked to the front of the class. But instead of simply solving the problems himself, he began to teach, breaking down complex ideas into understandable steps, encouraging other students to participate and showing them that intelligence wasn't a competition, but a collaboration. As he worked, he thought about his grandfather's words from the night before. This was what it meant to be a bridge between worlds, not abandoning one for the other, but finding ways to honor both while creating something new and better. The weeks that followed brought changes that rippled far beyond the small schoolhouse. Word of Joseph's achievements spread throughout the region, inspiring other Native American families to push for better educational opportunities for their children. The mission library saw an increase in young visitors, all eager to follow Joseph's example of self-directed learning. But perhaps the most significant change was in Mrs. Henderson herself. She began visiting the reservation, learning about Apache culture and history, discovering the rich intellectual traditions that she had dismissed as primitive. She started incorporating Native perspectives into her lessons, teaching all her students about the mathematical concepts embedded in traditional crafts, the astronomical knowledge preserved in oral traditions, and the sophisticated agricultural techniques developed over centuries. Joseph continued to excel, but he also became a mentor to younger students, showing them that academic success didn't require abandoning their cultural identity. He organized study groups that met in both English and Apache, created tutoring programs that honored traditional learning methods, and worked with tribal elders to document indigenous knowledge that was in danger of being lost. As graduation approached, Joseph faced the biggest decision of his life. The university acceptance letters represented opportunities beyond anything his family had ever imagined. But they also meant leaving his community at a time when his example was inspiring real change. His grandfather, now visibly aging but still sharp as the desert wind, offered the wisdom that would guide Joseph's choice. "A tree that grows tall and strong sends its roots deep into the earth," the old man said as they sat together under the stars. "The higher it reaches toward the sky, the deeper it must connect with the soil that feeds it. Go to university, grandson. Learn everything they can teach you. But remember that your roots are here in this desert with these people. And when you have gathered all the knowledge you can carry, bring it home." On graduation day, Joseph stood before his classmates as valedictorian, the first Native American to hold that honor in the school's history. His speech was brief but powerful, delivered in both English and Apache, honoring the past while embracing the future. "Education," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming the fullest version of who you already are. Today, I don't graduate as someone who has left his heritage behind, but as someone who carries it forward into new territories of possibility." As he accepted his diploma, Joseph looked out at the audience and saw faces that told the story of change. His grandfather sat in the front row, tears of pride streaming down his weathered cheeks. Mrs. Henderson applauded enthusiastically, her transformation from prejudiced teacher to advocate for Native education complete. Dr. Martinez beamed with satisfaction at the success of his decision to support Joseph. And scattered throughout the crowd were dozens of younger Native American students, their eyes bright with the knowledge that they too could achieve anything they set their minds to. That fall, Joseph left for Stanford University, carrying with him not just his books and belongings, but the hopes and dreams of an entire community. He would study engineering, specializing in water conservation systems that could benefit the arid Southwest. But he would also study education, preparing himself to return and build the kind of schools that honored both academic excellence and cultural heritage. The boy who had once been told that no Indian knows how to read was about to prove that Native Americans could not only read and write and calculate, but could also lead, innovate, and inspire. His name, written on that classroom wall in 3 languages, had become a symbol of possibility that would echo through generations. Years later, when Joseph returned to Arizona with his engineering degree and his plans for revolutionary water management systems, he would find a transformed educational landscape. Schools throughout the region had adopted multicultural curricula that honored Native American contributions to mathematics, science, and technology. Mrs. Henderson, now a principal herself, had become a leading advocate for indigenous education rights. And a new generation of Native American students was graduating from high schools and universities, carrying forward the torch that Joseph had lit with nothing more than courage, knowledge, and an unshakable belief in the power of education to change the world. The story of the Apache boy who silenced prejudice with mathematics had become legend, but more importantly, it had become a foundation upon which countless other success stories would be built. In proving that Indians could indeed read and write and calculate and dream and achieve, Joseph Crowfeather had opened doors that would never again be closed. Hey, my friends, this incredible true story of courage and determination shows us that knowledge truly is power, and that standing up for what's right can change not just our own lives, but entire communities. Help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories like this one. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth. Remember, every time we share these stories of triumph over prejudice, we honor the courage of people like Joseph Crowfeather and inspire others to stand up for justice and equality.